Welcome back to the weekly Education Pulse. I'm Sami.
And I'm Tony. Each week we bring to you the biggest stories and ideas shaping international school market around the world. In this episode, we'll start with some major updates from the sector's leading players in the news.
And after the news, Tony will be sharing insights from his latest article, The New Geography of Influence, exploring how the multipolar world is reshaping international education from who holds influence to how curricula and culture travel across borders.
Plenty to unpack this week, from expansion and innovation to shifting centres of global education power.
And we start this week in Qatar, where Etqan Global Academy, one of Doha's leading bilingual schools, has joined Nord Anglia Education.
Yes, this marks another major acquisition for Nord Anglia, continuing their strong run of strategic growth across the Middle East. The school offers bilingual programme combining international standards with Arabic language and Qatari cultural integration.
Yeah, the school currently serves students from pre-K to grade 12 and is located in Al Khisa, one of Doha's rapidly developing suburbs. What's significant here is that this move strengthens Nord Anglia's presence in the Gulf, adding to its existing campuses in the region.
That's right. Nord Anglia have been very deliberate in its acquisition recently. 2024, they added schools in Italy and Colombia, and now with Qatar added to the portfolio, they're really consolidating their position as one of the most globally diverse school groups in the world.
Yeah, the bilingual angle is key. This isn't a traditional international school acquisition. It's a local bilingual model that blends global and national frameworks. So it shows Nord Anglia's growing interest in localization and cultural adaptation rather than just simply exporting a single model everywhere across the world.
And it's part of a wider trend we've seen among other major school groups, diversifying offerings to reach the expats and local markets. With Qatar's education reforms encouraging bilingualism and national identity, this acquisition aligns perfectly with those national priorities.
Yeah, for Etqan's families, it also means access to Nord Anglia's global network, things like international teacher training, online collaborations, and of course the partnerships with universities such as MIT and Juilliard.
So it's certainly coming across as a win-win. Nord Anglia gains a strong foothold in Qatar's growing bilingual sector, and the school joins a network that can amplify its reach and resources.
Yeah, another sign that consolidation in the international schools market is far from slowing down. And at the Gulf, well, it remains one of the most strategic regions for group expansion.
And staying with Nord Anglia Education, the group has announced another major milestone, becoming the first international school organisation to develop a new suite of thinking routines in collaboration with Project Zero at Harvard Graduate School of Education.
Yeah, this is a fascinating one. Project Zero is known globally for its research into learning and thinking, particularly the visible thinking framework, which has influenced schools and teacher training worldwide.
And Nord Anglia's partnership takes that a step further. The two organisations have co-created new routines specifically designed for international school settings, building on years of classroom-based research and teacher feedback from across Nord Anglia's 90-plus schools.
Yeah, the goal is to help students develop deeper thinking habits, curiosity, perspective taking, reflection, and reasoning, rather than just knowledge recall. These routines are being integrated into all year levels from early years all the way through to secondary.
What's really interesting is how this reinforces Nord Anglia's positioning as an education group that invests in research-driven pedagogy. It's not just facilities or technology. While many school groups expand geographically, Nord Anglia continues to double down on what happens inside the classroom.
Yeah, and it's consistent with the direction we're seeing across the premium international school sector, where differentiation increasingly comes from the quality of teaching and learning frameworks rather than purely from branding or infrastructure.
Absolutely. Collaborations like this with Harvard's Project Zero add real credibility. They show how large school groups can use scale not only to grow, but to innovate, creating intellectual capital that benefits teachers and obviously students across the network.
Yeah, so between this and the Qatar acquisition we discussed earlier, Nord English strategy for 2025 looks balanced, growth through scale and growth through substance.
Well put. It's expansion, but with strong academic core, and that's what makes their trajectory so interesting to watch.
And well, now over to Europe, where the International School of Riga has officially opened its new purpose-built campus in Latvia's capital.
The new building represents a major step forward for the school, providing upgraded facilities and increased capacity for both local and international families. It's located in one of Riga's fastest growing residential areas and was designed with flexibility and sustainability in mind.
Yeah, the school's been operating since 2001, serving a diverse community representing over 45 nationalities. What stands out here is how the new building reflects Latvia's growing demand for modern, globally orientated education, particularly among internationally minded local families.
Yet the Baltic region might not make as many headlines as the Gulf or Southeast Asia, but the international schools market there is evolving steadily. Countries like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia are seeing increased interest from both expatriate professionals and returning families.
And it's not just demand driven. There's also push from governments to attract more foreign investment and skilled talent. And that means strengthening the education offer. Schools like International School Riga play a critical role in that ecosystem.
And the campus itself is impressive. It includes STEAM laboratories, outdoor learning zones, flexible classroom designs, all for collaborative learning. It's another example of how schools across Europe are aligning facility design with pedagogy, something that used to be the preserve of large international school groups.
Right, and the school's expansion also shows confidence in Latvia's future as a hub for both business and education. These type of developments send a strong signal that smaller markets are growing in maturity and also stability.
And for international families considering relocation to the Baltics, the availability of high quality international schooling like this is often a decisive factor.
So while the scale may be smaller than in Dubai or Riyadh, the impact and context is just as meaningful. It's a sign of sustainable, locally embedded growth in Europe's emerging education markets. And with that, it wraps up this week's news.
Yeah, and what's striking is that so many of these stories through different regions point to the same underlying theme, how global education is changing shape.
Exactly, and that brings us neatly to your latest article, Tony. You've titled it The New Geography of Influence and explores how international education is evolving alongside the world's shifting balance of power. So let's dive into that. What's the big idea behind this piece?
Well, for the most of the 20th century, both geopolitics and education were dominated by a handful of, countries, mainly the US and the UK. Their education systems, their universities, their curricula set the global standards for what international meant. But the world is no longer unipolar, and neither is education. Influence now is distributed across multiple centres, each with its own economic and cultural confidence.
Yeah, so the idea is that just as global power is becoming multipolar, education is too.
Exactly. And we've moved from a world defined by Western export to one driven by regional expression. In markets like Bangkok, Dubai, Ho Chi Minh City, the majority of international school students now hold local passports. For families, an international education is no longer just a ticket to get out of their country, it's a way to connect with global opportunity from within their own context.
And that's a complete shift from how international schools began, originally set up for expat families, now serving local communities that want both global recognition and local identity.
Right, and it's not just a demographic growth, it's a redistribution of educational influence. The gravitational pull that once was pointed towards London or New York is now balanced by regional hubs in Asia, the Gulf, and even parts of Africa and Latin America.
You also talk about this regionalization of supply. What does that look like in practice?
Well, we're seeing a diversification of who's shaping international education. Western school groups still play a very big role, but we now have Chinese, Indian, and Gulf investors creating new models. Leadership teams are increasingly local, and curricula are being reinterpreted, bilingual, inquiry-led, values-based, designed for regional context rather than copying Western systems.
So international no longer means imported. It's about how global ideas are interpreted locally.
Exactly. British curriculum in Kuala Lumpur or Doha is no longer a replica of one in England. It's a collaboration between systems, a hybrid that blends global pedagogy with local priorities. And that's what makes this new era so interesting. It's plural, diverse, and deeply contextual.
Yeah, and you describe curriculum as a form of soft power, which I find fascinating. How are countries using it that way?
Curriculum, projects a worldview. For decades, British and American systems, and obviously more recently, the IB, really dominate as the gold standards of mobility and prestige. But now we're seeing education as a diplomatic tool. India's recognition of the Australian curriculum, Japan's IB bilingual curriculum, South Korea's IB programs, again delivered in Korean. These are all examples of how nations are asserting cultural confidence through collaboration, not dependency.
So rather than importing an education model wholesale, countries are adapting them, localizing what fits and discarding what doesn't.
Exactly. It's education as negotiation and reshaping the global map of influence. Western frameworks are still important, but they're no longer at the center. They're part of a network ecosystem of exchange where Asia and the Gulf are becoming exporters of ideas in their own right.
Which means school leaders too have to think differently about what international really means in this environment.
Recruitment, professional development, even identity are shifting. Schools need educators who are culturally agile, people who can operate across multiple contexts, not just transplant one model from one country to another.
And for policymakers, this shift is equally important. You argue that education is becoming a key instrument of diplomacy, that countries able to export respected curricular frameworks gain soft power, while those that localize them gain independence.
Education is now a strategic asset. The countries that use it to build partnerships rather than walls were the ones who can thrive in this new multipolar world.
So, to put it simply, the unipolar era of international education is ending, and the future is multipolar, collaborative, and locally driven.
That's right. And the next phase of international education will be defined by connection over conformity, by systems that can learn from one another rather than replicate one another.
Yeah, I love that connection over conformity. It's such a powerful way to describe the future of our sector. And Tony, brilliant piece as always.
And that brings us to the end of this week's Weekly Education Pulse.
Yeah, thanks for joining us as we explored another round of big stories from Nord Anglia's continued growth and the opening of new schools that reflect a sector in transformation.
And of course, a deeper look at how international school landscape is becoming multipolar, with the influence now shared across regions, not concentrating from one or two countries.
It's a reminder that the future of international schooling will be defined not by where curriculum comes from, but how it's interpreted and adapted around the world.
Don't forget to like, share and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.
And as always, we'd love to hear from you. How do you see global influence shifting in education where you are? Drop a comment and join the conversation.
We'll be back next week with more updates, insights and analysis from across the international schools sector.
Until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.